Hi ladies, I thought I would film a less formal, chattier video today so that you can get to know me as a person a little bit more. Of course, if you like what you see in this video, you can also follow me over on Instagram at kindestmilk. And I thought a fun way to tell you a little bit more about myself would be to revive the breastfeeding tag that had been circulating around YouTube a few years ago. I would like to tag two of my favorite YouTubers to pick up on this tag again and like to invite them. Of course, I don't know whether they will because I'm such a small channel, but nevertheless I thought it would be fun to revive this tag, and therefore I'll be tagging Julie from Mama to 5. She's Canadian and she has 5 gorgeous children. Her youngest is 1 year old, so I'm not sure whether she might have done a breastfeeding tag in the past. I've been following her for the last 2 to 3 years, but perhaps she'd done a breastfeeding tag with her older children. And the other YouTuber I'd like to tag is Unconventional Mama, and she has 4 children. She just weaned her youngest daughter at 2.5 years, and her weaning journey is very gentle and inspirational. So those are the 2 lovely ladies that I will be tagging. Now a little bit about myself just before we get into the questions. I'm Regina. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, and I'm currently a stay-at-home mom to my 4 children. And since I've become a stay-at-home mom, I've also created an online breastfeeding preparation class called Breastfeeding Basics, a Practical Guide, which is available on the teaching platform Teachable. So just looking at the questions of the breastfeeding tag, as I mentioned, I have 4 children and they're now 10, 7 and 5 years and 22 months old, and it's currently obviously only my 22 months old still breastfeeding, and I've breastfed my children for different lengths of time. My first one, I breastfed him for 12 months, and then the second one, my daughter, I breastfed her for 18 months, the third one for 23 months, and my youngest is currently 23 months old and I'm still breastfeeding him, so I will be answering the questions with regards to my youngest. So the first question here is, where's the craziest or most random place you've ever breastfed? So at this stage, after 4 children, I breastfeed anywhere. Really, I've breastfed on a plane, I've breastfed at the beach, in the park. But what was the kind of craziest place for me personally, or felt craziest for me personally, was quite recently my sister-in-law's wedding. During the ceremony, he became quite impatient, and the couple, they were just about to exchange their vows, so I didn't want to disturb or spoil that moment for them. So it wasn't a ceremonial house, so I could go to the back of it, and I just sat down on the floor or kneeled down on the floor, and I had a shawl with me that was matching my dress, and I just latched him on and covered myself with it. And I think 1 or 2 guests were looking backwards, but nobody really felt disturbed, because obviously they were much more focused on the happy couple exchanging their vows. Just to add to that, I was very happy to be able to see, or even, I didn't see them as I was kneeling down, but I was very happy to be able to witness that moment and not having to leave because I needed to breastfeed my baby. So the second question is, how many hours do you think you've spent breastfeeding since your little one's birth? Now, as a lactation consultant, I know that we should watch our babies more than the clock. So I've never really timed feeds as such. We know they should feed at the beginning 8 to 12 times in 24 hours, and then as they are moving on to solids, when they get older, breastfeeding time that you spend breastfeeding becomes less. So even now, with my toddler, especially the daytime feeds, they would normally be very short, 5 minutes or less, just maybe to check in for comfort. But he does feed during the night still quite a bit. So I don't know where that number comes from. There's a number out there on YouTube that suggests it's about 35 hours per week. Now that's not research based, and I don't think you can even grasp that number because it's so individually different. But just for fun and just for the purpose of this tag, if you use the 35 hours per week, so he's 23 months now, so in total he is 100-week-old, so 52 plus 48 weeks, because he's nearly 2 years. So 100 times 35 would be 3,500 hours. And if you just see that number, that big number of 3,500 hours, it's quite amazing to think that you've spent so much time breastfeeding, but also at the same time it gives you a sense of achievement. So what's your favorite, the third question is, what's your favorite thing about breastfeeding? Well, there's so many benefits to breastfeeding really, and all the listing up all the benefits of breastfeeding would go way beyond the purpose of this tag now. But my personal favorite thing about breastfeeding is that it is really my go-to parenting tool for the baby and toddler years. So a lot of parenting issues you deal with during the toddler years, especially like when they're starting to walk and they fall over and they bump their head a little bit, and they come here and snuggle and you feed them, and straight away you can ease their pain through breastfeeding. Also, once they start discovering their own mind and their will, and they're starting to throw little wobbles and tantrums, then a toddler tantrum can also be tamed with breastfeeding. Also, I do have to admit, I still breastfeed my toddler to sleep, and I wouldn't know how to manage the whole family without me being able to breastfeed him to sleep and having to do the other kids' bedtime as well. Number 4, your toughest moment while breastfeeding. So with my youngest, the toughest moment while breastfeeding was definitely his first day of life. He needed to be in the neonatal intensive care unit for the first day of his life, because they weren't sure had he gotten some meconium from delivery in his lungs. He had an IV line, and I wasn't able to feed him at all during the first day because it took him too much effort breathing. So he also had a feeding tube, but they didn't feed him any milk on the first day at all. He was just on a glucose infusion. But that was quite hard because I was separated from him, and all I wanted to do was keep him in skin-to-skin contact and start breastfeeding him. And nevertheless, it was important for me to start stimulating my breast to let my body know that baby was born, and that my body needed to start producing milk. So I massaged and hand expressed colostrum every 3 hours and collected it, and they kept it in the fridge, and then thankfully after 24 hours he was able to receive my colostrum, and he recovered so quickly that on the second day I was able to breastfeed him, and luckily he latched on straight away, and from then on fed like a champ. So question number 5 is, how do you entertain yourself while breastfeeding? So I have to admit, in the early days when feeds took quite long, I would spend a lot of time, other than obviously looking at him and bonding with him and communicating with him. I'd look at my phone a lot, I'd be on YouTube a lot, on Instagram, being on breastfeeding forums, reading, but also sometimes I'd breastfeed and I'd have to keep my older children when they're at home from school. I'd have to keep them entertained, so I'd read them a book. So number 6, what's your favorite breastfeeding gadget or product? Now, I am a firm believer that breastfeeding is a low-cost activity in itself, and mostly all you need is your breasts, your baby, and your hands as well. And even with your hands, you can solve a lot of the breastfeeding challenges. You can massage a blocked duct yourself, you can support your breast for latch on, and you can support your baby with your hands. You can use your body to move to achieve the best possible and the most comfortable, deepest latch. So I know that there's a lot of products on the market, and some of them, they can be very useful in certain circumstances, but generally speaking, I think that we do not need a lot of tools, and a lot of the time companies take advantage of the vulnerability of new mothers. But if I had to mention one, it would be the my Terraline breastfeeding pillow. And I actually have this pillow since I trained as a midwife in 2002. I started my training as a midwife in Germany, and every girl in my course, we all got ourselves a breastfeeding pillow, but more so because you can keep it in your bed just for support during pregnancy as well, or when you want to sit up and read. My husband uses it a lot of the times as well. But just because I had it since my training, it was a welcome product, but I believe that any other cushions or props, rolled up blankets, duvets, anything you have to support your posture and your back while you're breastfeeding would do just as well. So number 7, how long do you plan to breastfeed? So this has changed for me with each child, as each breastfeeding journey is and was unique. The WHO, the World Health Organization, currently recommends that babies are breastfed exclusively for the first 6 months, and then with the introduction of solids, breastfeeding is continued up until the age of 2, and mothers and babies, if they wish to continue for as long as mother or baby want to, really. For me, the first one I breastfed for a year, and because I returned to work as well with my first 3 children, even after the 4th one, but only for a short time. But because I'm a stay-at-home mom now, and I'm at home with him, and he is most definitely my last baby, and I just want to cherish that moment. I don't want to pressure myself or him in setting a deadline by which we have to be done with breastfeeding. So we take each day as it comes and just go with the flow. And number 8, what's your most embarrassing breastfeeding moment? Now, I don't really, I mean, when as a mom of 4, I've had a lot more embarrassing parenting moments out in public, and when they're throwing a tantrum, or there are other situations that I find personally more embarrassing than anything to do with breastfeeding. But if I had to mention an awkward moment for myself, perhaps would have been the christening of my youngest, and the priest was invited for afternoon coffee and cake, and he sat right across me at the table, and I had to breastfeed my baby. So that would have probably been the most uncomfortable breastfeeding moment for me. So yeah, we're coming to the end of this breastfeeding tag now. These were all the 8 questions of this breastfeeding tag. I hope they gave you a little bit more insight into me as a person. If you have more questions that you would like to ask me, feel free to leave them in the comments below or follow me over on Instagram. And otherwise, until next time, I hope your breastfeeding journey is going well.